John Lennon, singer, songwriter, leader of a musical group that led a generation. Earlier this week, he was killed. Today, New York and the world mourn. Thousands of people are gathering in Central Park to mark Lennon's death in the manner requested by the widow, Yoko Ono, with 10 minutes of silent prayer. That is scheduled for 2 this afternoon, New York time. To date, the largest gathering in Central Park was in September, 400,000 showing up for the Elton John concert. Some previous estimates put today's expected showing at 500,000, but at this point it doesn't seem that the crowd will be that large. The focus for New York's tribute to the former Beatle is the park's band shell, where music by John Lennon and the Beatles and classical pieces are being played. And situated there among our reporters is Ernie Anastos. Apparently we have a little difficulty getting that picture up from Ernie. We will do so later on. The suspected killer, Chapman, is now at Rikers Island Prison. He was taken there from Manhattan's Bellevue Hospital. There had been many threats on his life. It was feared crowds from today's vigil might cause a disturbance at the hospital. Chapman is undergoing psychiatric tests to see if he's fit to stand trial. In his last interview, John Lennon said his work would not be complete until he was dead and buried, and that he hoped that would not be for a long time. Lennon said, "I'd like to make some more records before I toss." The interview was given 7 hours before he was shot and killed in front of his apartment building, the Dakota, in New York's Manhattan. And now we can switch to the park and Ernie Anastos.
Yoko Ono had asked for no tributes. She said she didn't want that. What she wanted was a silent prayer, a 10-minute silent prayer to pray for the soul of John Lennon. The outpour is something that you really have to feel. I hope you can see it through this television camera. We can sense it here. This is a gentle crowd. What they're doing, they're handing out flowers and buttons. And there are signs everywhere that we look around that says peace and love. And we will miss you, John. We remember you. That is the kind of mood, that is the kind of feeling that permeates this crowd here today. John Lennon represents music. And radio stations around the country are having a very special broadcast today. They'll be remembering the life and time of John Lennon. And we will be remembering here with interviews and more to report from Grand Central, or I should say from Central Park. Once again, back to you, Roger.
The Dakota apartment building on Manhattan's Upper West Side was the center of Lennon's life in his last years, where he lived and where he died. Today, mourners are still in front of the Dakota, maintaining a vigil that began minutes after his shooting. It was at the Dakota where Lennon played house husband for the last few years, raising his son, Sean, where wife Yoko Ono handled the Lennon's finances, the Lennon estate reportedly $250 million. And it was at the Dakota where the Lennons decided to break their silence and record their new album, Double Fantasy. The fantasy and the piece ended violently 6 days ago, also at the Dakota.
So they stepped out of the limousine and they went inside the gate there, and then all of a sudden they heard 5, 6 shots, and that was it.
4 cops pulled John Lennon out and put him into the back of a police car, and his mouth, he was bleeding from his mouth, and it was a terrible sight.
Mr. Chapman came up behind him and called to him, "Mr. Lennon," as he arrived at that doorway. And then in a combat stance, he emptied the Charter Arms .38 caliber gun that he had with him and shot John Lennon.
The news spread quickly. Within minutes, fans, the curious, and reporters are at the Dakota apartment building, waiting for news from Roosevelt Hospital.
John Lennon was brought to the emergency room at the Roosevelt site, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, this evening, shortly before 11 p.m. He was dead on arrival.
The first reaction, disbelief. Why would someone stalk and kill John Lennon? And why now, when Lennon was just coming out of 5 years of seclusion? Almost immediately, a vigil of stunned fans gathered at the Dakota. Then the questions begin. Who was this strange assassin? Witnesses say he had been hanging around outside the Dakota for days, waiting for Lennon.
So nice,
and
really,
clean cut.
and clean cut. He was, you know.
From the little bit he spoke to us, he just seemed like a really nice, genuine, honest person.
6 hours before he fired 4 shots into Lennon, Mark David Chapman asked Lennon for his autograph. He was a fan, like thousands of others, but he let fantasy go out of control. He bought a gun, flew from Hawaii to New York with $2,000. The state prosecutor charges premeditated execution. Whatever, Chapman is taken to Bellevue Hospital for 30 days of psychiatric observation. His attorney tells John Slattery Chapman seemed irrational.
Does he tell you why he shot the man?
He gave me a reason. He gave me several reasons.
Did they seem to you to be sane reasons for killing John Lennon?
Well, the result was I went out into court and I made an application to have them examined by a couple of psychiatrists. Obviously, I didn't consider them to be sane reasons.
All week, reaction from Lennon's friends and associates. Ringo Starr flies to New York to be with Yoko Ono. In London, the man who wrote hundreds of songs with Lennon seems stunned.
I was very shocked, you know. It's terrible news. A drag, isn't it?
Outside the Dakota, the vigil goes on as the reaction becomes overreaction. 2 suicides reported, and Yoko Ono pleads with fans not to despair and calls for today's silent vigil. In the next week, psychiatrists must decide if Chapman is fit to stand trial. Friends say he wasn't a violent man. Chapman's wife says only that she's sorry for Lennon's family.
I'm just still, again, very concerned about Mark, and I'm just very, very sorry that this had to happen to Yoko Ono and her family, and that her husband had to die.
People listening to the Lennon tributes on radio, whether they're at home or in their automobiles, are being asked to open their doors and windows and let the music play to the outside world. Here in New York, that might be a little chilling today. And now we're going to switch back to the park and the Van Schell and Ernie Anastos.
There is a gentleman standing next to me, Sid Bernstein, who was really responsible back in 1964 for bringing the Beatles here to America. And he knows about John Lennon, and he wants to share some of those feelings and thoughts with us today. When was the last time you spoke to John?
I think it was early this past spring. We met on the street. The usual warm hello from John, hug. And he referred to Shea Stadium when he said, I saw the top of the mountain, as I felt when we did Shea together, and I saw the top of the mountain. And now here again, it's like being at the top of the mountain. So many, obviously hundreds of thousands of people here to shed one giant tear on the earth that holds his ashes. And let's hope that earth is nourished so that out of this comes some kindness, some caring, some more consideration for our fellow man, because that's what he wanted, and that's what he wants wherever he is. It's reminiscent of the days of November '63 when we lost a beautiful man, a great young leader, political leader, the leader of our country. The kind of sadness that prevailed then is similar. Gun control is a very important issue on the minds of hundreds of thousands of these people. It's something that has to be dealt with.
Yes.
And in this city where we live and where he lived and chose to live and died, more police on the streets, no matter what the cost.
I said, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your words and your presence with us today to share in this moment. Thank you, Sid.
Thank you.
Sid Bernstein, and now we'll go back to you, Roger.
In his last interview, John Lennon said that his audience was made up of people who had been through the 60s and survived. In Lennon's words, survived the war, the drugs, the politics, the violence on the streets. We'll have more when we return.
Momentarily, we'll have a 10-minute silent prayer in memory of John Lennon. That being the request of his late wife.
We ask for complete silence for this 10 minutes. Please get comfortable. Those who are sitting or standing, get into a comfortable position. Please turn off all radios. Please stop any sale or vending of any merchandise or any foods which may be out amongst you. Meditate in your quiet way. Stand still. And please give your utmost respect for these solemn last 10 minutes. We begin our vigil now, and at the conclusion, to terminate our vigil, we will begin our recorded John Lennon music. We start now. May we all pray. Thank you.
Throughout the country and around the world, thousands of John Lennon fans have joined hands in memorials to the songwriter. In Amsterdam yesterday, over 4,000 people stood outside the Amsterdam Hilton, where John Lennon and Yoko Ono spent 7 days, never leaving their room, that in protest of the war in Vietnam. And as a tribute, the hotel went dark for several minutes yesterday, except for the room where the Lennons had stayed. In Toronto, 35,000 mourners stood in the cold, holding a candlelight vigil for John Lennon. They braved Toronto's snow and high winds to keep Lennon's spirit alive with his song, All You Need Is Love.
You begin to make it better.
And earlier in the week in Los Angeles, more than 1,000 people sang together, holding candles and singing songs in Lennon's memory. We're going to switch back to Central Park now in Ernie and Anastos.
Well, we're back at Central Park, and there are people that are sitting up in the trees, people who are sitting on the ground, holding each other, hugging one another, and perhaps remembering what just happened a short while ago, where they held hands, looked at one another, and did what Yoko Ono wanted, prayed for the soul of John Lennon.
Well, we can take one final look at the Dakota apartment building where it all happened so tragically, not so long ago, 6 days, I believe, if I'm counting correctly. It doesn't seem that the vigil is very large there, nor was the vigil in the park as large as some had anticipated, but the feeling was. For Ernie and Anastos, for myself, good afternoon.